Ethan Carter, a self-made billionaire, thought he had it all: a successful tech empire, a beautiful wife named Lauren, and a newborn son, Aiden. But when Lauren abruptly walks out on them, chasing a glamorous life with a younger artist, Ethan is left heartbroken, raising his son alone. Struggling to balance fatherhood in his collapsing emotional world, Ethan finds unexpected solace in a quiet, warm-hearted flower seller named Grace, who works at a street corner near his company. Grace, once a talented florist whose life was upended by betrayal and loss, sees through Ethan's pain. As Ethan opens up, their connection deepens. However, secrets from the past resurface. Lauren returns, filled with regret, seeking forgiveness. Grace's former life comes to light, revealing a connection to Ethan's past in a way no one saw coming. As truths unravel, choices must be made between love and guilt, past and future, pain and healing. This is a story of loss, unexpected love, quiet redemption, and what it truly means to rebuild a life from ruins. Ethan Carter stood frozen in the doorway of his penthouse apartment, the city lights behind him flickering like distant stars. The silence inside wasn't peaceful, it was hollow, unnatural. He called out her name once, twice, no answer. The living room was pristine, untouched, everything exactly where it should be, except her. On the kitchen counter sat a single white envelope with his name written in Lauren's cursive, delicate and deliberate. He didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he walked through each room, searching for signs that this wasn't real. Her favorite scarf no longer hung by the door. Her perfume no longer lingered in the hallway. The nursery, however, was different. Aiden, their newborn son, lay in his crib, gurgling softly, alone. It was then that Ethan opened the envelope. "I'm sorry," it began. "I can't do this anymore." She didn't offer many details, just vague words about feeling trapped, about needing to find herself. She wrote that Aiden would be better off with someone stronger, someone capable. She said Ethan had always been better at loving than she was, that she hoped one day he could forgive her, but she didn't expect it. She asked him not to look for her. Ethan sat in silence for hours, the letter crumpled in his fist, the sound of Aiden's cries slowly breaking through the numbness. The next few days blurred together. He fed Aiden formula from shaking hands, barely slept, and went through meetings like a ghost. His assistant, worried but professional, began covering for him, but even she could see he wasn't the same. The man who once built an empire from scratch couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. His board of directors assumed stress, maybe burnout, but this was something deeper, an unraveling from the inside. He was used to control, to structure, to plans, but nothing in his carefully crafted life had prepared him for waking up alone, for changing diapers at 3 a.m., for the realization that someone he trusted with everything had simply walked away. Ethan didn't talk about it, not to friends, not to his therapist, certainly not to the media. Rumors started to swirl, but he ignored them. His entire world had narrowed to one small apartment, one tiny baby, and one gaping silence where Lauren used to be. One night, as he rocked Aiden to sleep, Ethan whispered a promise: not to find Lauren, not to fix what was broken, but to protect Aiden from the kind of pain that now lived in his own chest. He didn't know how, or even if he could, but he would try, because something had to matter now. Something had to come first. And for the first time, maybe ever, Ethan Carter understood what it meant to lose everything, and what it meant to begin again. The nights blurred into each other, marked only by the soft cries of Aiden and the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair Ethan had once bought on a whim, more for its sleek design than any real purpose. Now it was the one place where time slowed, where Ethan could hold his son close and feel a sliver of calm in the chaos. Aiden was only a few weeks old, still fragile, his needs simple but relentless. Every bottle warmed in the early morning hours, every diaper changed with fumbling hands reminded Ethan that he was no longer just a CEO or a husband. He was a father, a single father, and no amount of business acumen could prepare him for the look in his son's eyes at 4 a.m., silently begging for comfort he wasn't sure he could give. The penthouse, once a space of ambition and modern elegance, had grown cold. The dining table sat untouched. The bed remained half-made. Ethan's tailored suits hung untouched in the closet while he rotated between the same three t-shirts. The Ethan Carter the world knew, the poised, articulate leader featured in magazines, had gone quiet. He tried not to think about Lauren, but she lingered in everything. The soft lullabies she used to hum in the shower, the mug with best mom ever still sitting in the cabinet, her handwriting on sticky notes, reminders about groceries, pediatric appointments, little inside jokes. All of it remained like a ghost that refused to leave. Work became a performance. Ethan would show up to board meetings, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse, nodding at figures he barely processed. His assistant, Claire, began screening most of his calls, sensing he needed space. Only a few people dared to ask where Lauren had gone, and Ethan offered no explanation, just a flat, "She's not here." One afternoon, while trying to soothe Aiden's inconsolable cries, Ethan found himself pacing the living room, bouncing the baby in his arms. Frustration welled in his chest, not at Aiden, but at everything else, at Lauren's abandonment, at his own helplessness, at the emptiness that had replaced a life once so full. Eventually, Aiden drifted to sleep, tiny fingers still clutching the edge of Ethan's shirt. The silence that followed was deafening. That evening, Ethan stood at the nursery door longer than usual. He watched his son sleep, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. And for the first time in weeks, Ethan let himself cry, quietly, not out of weakness, but out of grief, for the life that had shattered, for the man he no longer recognized, for the boy who would grow up never knowing his mother's touch. And yet, even in that heartbreak, something stirred, a flicker, a sense that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward, not for him, but for Aiden. Because if Ethan had nothing else, he still had the weight of that promise, that he would never leave, that he would show up every single day, no matter how broken he felt. The world outside moved on, but in the nursery, surrounded by pale blue walls and the scent of baby powder, a man was slowly learning how to rebuild, from the inside out. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Ethan first saw her. He had stepped out of his car, distracted, umbrella half open against the drizzle that had blanketed the city since morning. The meeting he'd just left had been a blur. More stockholder tension, more talk about public image, more eyes watching him for signs of weakness. But outside the office tower, just beyond the revolving glass doors, was a small weathered flower cart. Tucked beneath a faded green canopy, a woman stood arranging bouquets with practiced hands. She wasn't young in the way models were, but her presence was striking, still, grounded, untouched by the rush of the city. Her brown hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, strands curling from the rain. A faint smile touched her lips as she worked, as if the storm and steel all around her didn't exist. Ethan almost passed her by, but then he saw the lilies, white Casablanca lilies, Lauren's favorite. He hesitated, unsure why the sight of them made his throat tighten. Maybe it was the memory of their wedding, of the centerpieces Lauren had insisted on. Maybe it was the ache of everything that had come undone. "Would you like something simple or something to say sorry?" the woman asked, her tone light but not unkind. Ethan turned toward her, startled. Her voice was calm, with a warmth that cut through the gray. She didn't look at him like the others did, not with pity, not with calculation, but with quiet curiosity. "Neither," he replied after a pause. It's for someone retiring, I think. She didn't question the vagueness. Instead, she picked out a small bouquet, sunflowers, snapdragons, and a single pink rose. Unexpected, gentle. She seems like someone who brings light into rooms, the woman said. This should match. He paid without haggling, without even really looking at the total. As she handed over the flowers, their fingers brushed. Brief, unremarkable. But something in that moment felt anchored, real, unlike anything Ethan had felt in weeks. Thanks, he said. Then as an afterthought, what's your name? Grace. He nodded, unsure why he asked, unsure why he cared. The rain picked up as he walked back to the car, bouquet in hand. His assistant later commented on how thoughtful it was, how the flowers softened the meeting room. Ethan barely heard her. His mind kept drifting back to the flower stand, to Grace. He told himself it was nothing, just a moment, a transaction. But 2 days later, he found himself taking the long way out of the office, just to pass the stand again. She was there, of course, rearranging, trimming, tying. This time, he didn't need an excuse to stop. He bought another bouquet, didn't even say who it was for. Grace didn't ask. She just smiled. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt something crack open inside him. Not a wound, but a space. A quiet place where maybe, just maybe, something new could grow. Ethan began stopping by the flower stand more often. Sometimes he bought a bouquet, sometimes just a single stem. Once he didn't buy anything at all, just stood beneath the canopy while the rain tapped rhythmically against the canvas above them. Grace didn't seem to mind. She never asked too much, never filled the silence with forced cheer. She had a way of letting silence speak for itself, as though she understood that not all wounds needed words to be seen. They talked about small things at first, weather, customers, which flowers held up best in the summer heat. But beneath the surface of their conversations, something softer stirred. Grace spoke in a tone that never tried to fix him, and Ethan, for reasons he couldn't name, found himself returning more often just to hear her speak. He learned she lived in a tiny apartment over a bakery on 9th Street, that she grew up helping her grandmother in a flower shop back in Ohio, that she used to run her own boutique before, as she put it, life took a sharp left. She never offered the full story, and Ethan never asked. He didn't tell her much about himself either, just said he worked in tech, that he had a son, that his wife was no longer around. She nodded gently at that, not prying, just listening. It was the kind of listening Ethan hadn't felt in a long time, free of agenda, expectation, or judgment. One afternoon, as he stood by her stand with a cup of black coffee in one hand and a daisy in the other, Grace turned to him and said, "You seem tired, but not from work." Ethan didn't respond right away. The honesty in her words felt like a pebble tossed into still water, rippling through him. "I guess I forgot how to breathe," he said finally, the words surprising even himself. Grace looked at him, her expression unreadable but kind. "Then maybe it's time to learn again." That night back at the penthouse, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed while Aiden slept in his crib. He stared out at the city, lights blinking like scattered stars. For weeks, his world had felt like a tunnel, narrow, suffocating, dark. But now there was a glimmer of something else. Not hope, not yet, but a pause, a breath, a sense that life might not always feel like drowning. He didn't know what Grace was to him, or what he was to her, but she had become a presence, a stillness in the storm. And for a man who had built a life on noise and momentum, that stillness felt like the beginning of something he hadn't dared believe in. Healing. The next day, Ethan brought her coffee. No flowers, just coffee. Grace accepted it with a small smile, her eyes meeting his without a trace of surprise. And there, beneath the rusted canopy of a street corner flower stand, something quiet and steady began to grow. slow as roots, gentle as rain. It had been nearly 2 months since Lauren walked out, and while her absence had settled into Ethan's life like a permanent shadow, he had started to move differently. The ache was still there, some mornings sharper than others, but it no longer dictated his every breath. And yet healing has a cruel rhythm. Just when you think you've begun to stand, the past reaches out and pulls at your feet. It started with a text from Claire, his assistant. "You might want to avoid the tabloids today." Ethan didn't click the link right away. He stared at the message for a long moment, then tossed the phone onto the kitchen counter and went to prepare Aiden's bottle. But curiosity has a voice, and it grows louder when left unanswered. He eventually gave in. Actually, there she was, Lauren, smiling, walking hand in hand with a man no older than 25, shirt unbuttoned, paint-splattered jeans. The headline screamed, "Betrayal. Billionaire's wife leaves baby behind, finds freedom with struggling artist." Ethan stared at the image, his jaw tight, knuckles white around his coffee mug. The woman in the photo was still beautiful, still Lauren, but something about her seemed unrecognizable. The warmth that once lived in her eyes had been replaced by something else. Frenzy, escape, maybe regret, maybe not. He should have felt anger or disgust, but instead what rose in him was sadness, deep, aching sorrow for the life they had almost built, and the woman who had chosen to abandon it. Later that day, he stopped by Grace's flower stand as usual. He tried to hide the weight in his shoulders, but she noticed. She always did. "You look like someone punched a hole through your chest," she said gently, handing him a marigold without waiting for a payment. Ethan didn't respond right away. He stared down at the flower in his hand. She was spotted with someone else, younger, smiling, like none of it mattered. Grace didn't flinch. She didn't offer platitudes or rush to defend him. Instead, she simply asked, "Do you still love her?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't said those words in so long he wasn't sure he knew what they meant anymore. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I love the version of her that used to exist. Or maybe I just hate how much I don't understand her anymore." Grace nodded slowly, her fingers busy tying a ribbon around a bouquet. "Love doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it just changes shape, becomes something else. Sadness, maybe, or silence." They stood there in the quiet hum of passing traffic and rustling leaves. No more words were needed. That night, as Ethan rocked Aiden to sleep, he thought about Lauren, not the woman in the tabloid, but the one he used to know. The one who sang in the kitchen while making pancakes. The one who cried when they brought Aiden home from the hospital. The one who, at some point, became someone else entirely. He didn't know what her return would look like, or if it would ever come. But he did know one thing. The man she had left behind was no longer waiting. He was learning slowly to stand in the ruins. And in the quiet space between sorrow and survival, something new had begun to bloom. Grace's apartment was nothing like Ethan had imagined. He had pictured something modest, perhaps even sparse. After all, she sold flowers on a street corner, rain or shine. But when she opened the door that Saturday afternoon, he stepped into a space filled with warmth. The scent of jasmine hung in the air, and potted plants lined every windowsill. There were books stacked in corners, watercolor paintings on the walls, and light jazz playing softly in the background. It was quiet but not lonely, lived in, honest. "I don't usually invite people in," Grace said, setting a tray of tea and cookies on the table between them. "But you're not people, not really. You're different." Ethan smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. He hadn't meant to end up here. He'd been on his way to pick up a custom bouquet for a friend's engagement when a sudden storm rolled in. Grace had waved him over, offered shelter, and somehow, without planning, it had become more than that. They sat across from each other on her worn-out couch, the storm tapping insistently on the windows. Grace poured the tea. I used to own a floral boutique, she said, almost casually. In Chicago, it was small but beautiful. My whole life went into it. I spent years building something that felt like mine. Ethan watched her, sensing the weight beneath her voice. What happened? She paused, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. I trusted the wrong people. My fiancé at the time, Matthew, convinced me to take out a loan to expand. He said he believed in me, in us. I put the business in both our names. You can guess the rest. He could, too easily. When the loan defaulted, he disappeared, along with my savings. The shop closed 6 weeks later. I moved here to start over. I sell flowers now. On the street, simple, safe. Her voice didn't break, but it cracked, just slightly, on that last word. Ethan leaned back, the steam from the tea warming his face. You don't talk like someone who lost everything. Grace looked at him. That's because I didn't. I lost the life I thought I wanted, but not the part of me that knew how to grow something beautiful. They fell into silence, the kind that settles between people who understand each other without needing to fill every space with words. When Ethan left that evening, the rain had stopped. Grace handed him a small pot of daisies wrapped in brown paper. For Aiden, she said, he seems like the kind of boy who'll grow up kind. He stood there for a moment, the door half open, her hand still resting on the frame. Something passed between them then. Not quite romance, not yet, but a sense of shared weight, and perhaps something lighter growing underneath. On the way home, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her words, about trust, about growth, about the quiet strength it takes to rebuild when everything familiar has been stripped away. He placed the daisies on Aiden's windowsill that night. As the baby stirred in his sleep, Ethan whispered softly, "You'd like her. One day you'll know why." And though he wasn't sure where this was going or what it meant, Ethan felt something steadying inside him. Not excitement, not passion, something better. Peace. The morning light filtered through the nursery window, catching the edges of the small pot of daisies Grace had given them. Aiden was 6 months old now, chubby-legged and wide-eyed, always reaching, always observing. Ethan had grown used to the early mornings, to the quiet rhythm of bottles and lullabies, to the small victories of fatherhood, like getting Aiden to sleep without rocking or making it through a diaper change without a mess. But nothing prepared him for the moment he heard his son laugh for the first time. It was a Saturday. Grace had offered to visit, bring fresh flowers for the apartment, and somehow, without saying it, check on him and Aiden. She arrived just past 9, wearing a soft green cardigan, a basket of white tulips in one hand, a bag of muffins in the other. Her presence had become a comfort, like a familiar song you didn't realize you'd missed until it played again. They sat together on the floor of the nursery, Ethan leaning against the wall, Aiden on a blanket between them. Grace held a small plush giraffe, bouncing it in rhythm as she made exaggerated animal sounds. Ethan watched, amused, arms folded loosely across his chest. And then it happened. Aiden let out a high, sudden laugh, a pure, unexpected sound that rang through the room like sunlight breaking cloud. Ethan froze. Grace looked at him, eyes wide. Did he just? Another giggle, this time louder. Ethan dropped to his knees, crawling closer to his son, who now slapped the blanket with both hands, eyes locked on Grace. That's the first time, Ethan said, voice quiet, thick. He's never laughed before. Grace didn't say anything. She just smiled, genuinely, fully, and nudged the giraffe again, drawing out another wave of laughter. Ethan sat back, overwhelmed by the sound, the simplicity of the joy that filled the room. For so long, this space had held only weight, of absence, of sorrow, of trying too hard. But now there was light. Later, after Aiden fell asleep in his crib, Grace stepped into the kitchen to pour more coffee. Ethan followed, watching her move like she belonged in this space, like she'd always been part of the rhythm. He leaned against the counter. You know, I haven't heard laughter in this apartment since Lauren left. Not real laughter. Not like that. Grace set the mugs down, her expression soft. Babies don't pretend. If he laughed, it's because he felt something real. Maybe he sees something you don't. Ethan shook his head slowly. I don't know how to be both broken and present. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding together. You're here, she said. That counts for more than you think. They drank in silence, the kind that had grown comfortable between them. As Grace gathered her things to leave, Ethan walked her to the door, Aiden still asleep in the other room. He hesitated before speaking. Would you come by again? Just if you have time. Grace looked up at him, expression unreadable but kind. I'd like that. After she left, Ethan stood for a long time at the door. He thought of the way Aiden had looked at Grace, the way his laugh had broken the stillness, the way Grace had simply been there. No demands, no explanations. For the first time in months, the future no longer looked like something to survive. It looked like something that might, just might, be worth building. The first message came on a Sunday morning. Ethan had just returned from the park with Aiden, who had fallen asleep in the stroller, with one fist still gripping a half-chewed teething ring. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender from the fresh bouquet Grace had brought the day before. Everything was still, warm, safe. Then his phone buzzed. Lauren, I'm back in the city. I need to talk. Ethan stared at the screen, heart suddenly heavy in his chest. He hadn't heard from her in nearly 3 months. No calls, no visits, just her name in gossip columns, her face beside a younger man's, and the quiet weight of absence. Now, with 8 words, she had shattered the calm he'd worked so hard to rebuild. He didn't reply right away. That afternoon, he found himself pacing in the living room while Aiden napped. He read the message again and again, waiting for some kind of anger or resentment to rise. But what he felt instead was confusion, not because Lauren wanted to talk, but because a part of him had expected this moment and still wasn't ready. 2 days passed, then another message. Lauren, please, I made mistakes, but I want to see him. I miss him. I miss you. The next morning, Ethan agreed to meet her. Neutral ground, a quiet cafe on the Upper West Side. No photographers, no lawyers, just the two of them. When he walked in, she was already there. Lauren looked thinner, older somehow, though still beautiful in that effortless way that had once drawn him in. But the shimmer had dulled. Her hair was tucked into a messy bun, and there were shadows under her eyes. She stood when she saw him, her hands trembling as she smoothed her coat. Hi, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, sat. There was a long pause before either of them spoke. Finally, she said, I left because I couldn't breathe, because I didn't know who I was anymore. Everything felt like a performance. The perfect wife, the new mother, the billionaire's beautiful accessory. Ethan watched her carefully, arms folded. You didn't just leave, he said. You abandoned our son. Without warning, without explanation. Tears welled in her eyes. I know what I did, and I don't expect forgiveness. I want to make things right. I want to see Aiden. I want to be part of his life again. The words hit him harder than he expected, because beneath all the betrayal, she was still Aiden's mother. And no matter how much Ethan wanted to protect his son, he couldn't erase that truth. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. I need time, he said quietly, and I need to know this isn't just regret talking. Lauren nodded. It's not. I've changed, Ethan. I've seen what I gave up, and I want to try again. Later that evening, Ethan stood by Aiden's crib, watching his son sleep peacefully. He thought about Lauren's face, her apology, the cracks in her voice. But he also thought about Grace, about her steady presence, her quiet strength, her absence of drama. He thought about how Aiden had laughed in her arms, and he wondered what it would mean to allow the past a seat at the table when the future was already beginning to form. That night he didn't sleep. He lay awake, caught between two worlds, one he used to know and one he was just beginning to believe in. And for the first time since Lauren left, Ethan didn't know what he wanted, only that something was about to shift, again. The next few days unfolded in a quiet tension Ethan couldn't quite name. Lauren didn't press him, but her presence hung in the background like a fog. Text messages checking in, asking about Aiden's favorite snacks, his nap schedule, if she could drop off a book he used to like as a newborn. She was cautious, overly gentle, almost rehearsed in her regret. Grace noticed the change in him almost immediately. She said nothing the first time he came by the flower stand that week. He looked tired, distracted, his mind elsewhere. She handed him a wrapped bouquet without a word, and he took it without looking at the flowers. But on the third day, she asked, "Is she back?" Ethan froze, fingers tightening around the paper. He didn't ask how Grace knew. Somehow he always expected her to sense things before he said them aloud. "She wants to see Aiden," he admitted. "She says she's changed, that she regrets leaving." Grace nodded slowly, arranging tulips in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured. "Regret isn't the same as change. Sometimes it's just the echo of loss, not a promise to do better." He didn't respond, didn't argue, but the words settled heavily in his chest. Later that week, he visited Grace's apartment again. It had started to become a quiet ritual: tea on the worn-out couch, Aiden playing on the floor, soft music humming in the background. It was their shared space now, however undefined. But that evening felt different. Ethan was quieter, restless. Grace brought out a photo album, something she hadn't shared before. "These are from my shop," she said, flipping through the pages, "back when I still believed life could be planned." The pictures were bright, soft-lit arrangements, wedding bouquets, pressed flower art. But one image stopped Ethan cold. It was Lauren, standing beside Grace in a photo outside the shop, holding a bouquet of orchids, smiling wide like she didn't have a care in the world. Ethan blinked. "You knew her?" Grace looked at the photo, then back at him. "Not well. She was a regular at the boutique. Came in almost every week, sometimes alone, sometimes not." He could hear the shift in her voice. "Once," she continued carefully, "she came in with a man who wasn't you. They didn't hide it. He called her darling. She laughed. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just assumed, well, I don't know what I assumed." The air in the room went still. Ethan sat back, absorbing the weight of her words. He had always suspected Lauren had been drifting away before she left, but this was confirmation, undeniable, a truth he hadn't asked for and now couldn't unhear. Grace looked down, almost apologetic. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you. I didn't want to be part of whatever this is becoming, but I also didn't want to lie by omission." Ethan stood, ran a hand through his hair. The room felt suddenly small, stifling. "You were right to tell me," he said finally, voice low. "I just don't know what to do with it." Grace nodded. "You don't have to decide tonight, but you deserve to make choices with your eyes open." That night back in his apartment, Ethan stood by the window, watching the city lights blur into fog. His mind replayed the photo, the man's hand on Lauren's waist, the ease in her smile. She hadn't just left him. She had already been leaving long before she walked out the door. And yet here she was, asking for forgiveness, for a place in Aiden's life, for a second chance. But now Ethan saw the past clearly, and he knew the truth had a cost. The question was, who would have to pay it? Ethan didn't sleep much that night. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the soft sounds of Aiden breathing through the baby monitor. The city outside continued its rhythm, indifferent to his thoughts. By morning, the truth had settled like a stone in his chest. He couldn't pretend anymore. Not with Lauren, not with himself. She arrived that afternoon, standing awkwardly in the doorway like a guest who didn't know if she was welcome. She wore a soft beige coat, her hair pulled back neatly, a tote bag slung over one shoulder. Inside the bag, she carried a book, Goodnight Moon, the one she used to read to Aiden when he was just a few days old. Ethan stepped aside. "He's napping." Lauren nodded and stepped inside. Her eyes swept over the space like she was trying to remember it, or maybe trying to forget how easily she'd left it. She set the book down on the coffee table and sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped. "I know you don't trust me," she said softly, "and I don't blame you. I walked away from both of you. I thought I needed space to find myself, but I didn't find peace. I found silence, and that silence screamed louder than I expected." Ethan sat across from her, expression unreadable. "Did you find him too? The man from the flower shop?" Her face fell. "I'm not here to defend what I did. I was selfish, restless. I thought love was supposed to be easy, that if it felt heavy, it meant something was wrong. But the truth is, I was the one who broke it. I see that now." He watched her carefully, his voice steady. "You were cheating before you left." She looked down, ashamed. "Yes, but even then, I think I knew it wouldn't last. It was never about him. It was about running." Ethan let the silence stretch. "I loved you, Lauren," he said, "even when I didn't understand you, even when you shut me out. And when you left, I blame myself. I thought maybe I worked too much, maybe I didn't listen enough. But the truth is, love isn't just about staying. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Tears brimmed in Lauren's eyes. "I don't expect you to take me back," she whispered. "I'm not even asking you to. But I want to know our son. I want to be in his life, even if I have to start from the outside." Ethan looked toward the nursery, then back at her. "I believe people can change," he said, "but not overnight, and not just because they're lonely. If you want to be part of Aiden's life, you'll have to prove that, with time, with consistency, not just words." Lauren nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. And as for us," he continued, "I'm not the same man you left. I've built something new, not perfect, but real. I've learned how to show up for my son. I've learned that healing isn't a moment, it's a process." She stood then, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. "I'll wait. I'll earn whatever part of him you're willing to give me." As she reached the door, she hesitated. "That woman at the flower stand, is she someone important to you?" Ethan didn't flinch. "Yes, she is." Lauren nodded, offered a sad, knowing smile, then walked away. When the door closed, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He looked around the apartment, the scattered toys, the daisy pot on the window ledge, the faint scent of lavender still in the air. The past had knocked on his door, but he hadn't let it in. Not fully, and in that decision, something inside him settled. It wasn't triumph, it was clarity. Summer melted slowly into fall, and the air in the city turned crisp. Leaves rustled underfoot, and the breeze carried the scent of cinnamon from street vendors. Ethan found himself watching the seasons change, not through a boardroom window, but through the wide, curious eyes of his son. Every morning brought new questions, new little discoveries, and each night ended with the same small fingers wrapped tightly around his. Aiden had started preschool 3 mornings a week. On those days, Ethan would drop him off, then walk 2 blocks to a modest flower stall, now expanded with fresh wooden shelves, seasonal arrangements, and hand-painted signs. Ava stood behind the counter, her apron stained with pollen and petals, her hair tied back in a loose braid that always came undone by noon. Their relationship had grown slowly, cautiously, without grand declarations. They didn't need them. There was something sacred in the quiet, the way Ava remembered Ethan's coffee order, or the way he brushed dirt from her cheek when she was too busy arranging bouquets to notice. She never asked him to explain the pain he carried. She never demanded to be more than what he was ready to offer. But day by day, Ethan let himself soften around her. There were no secrets between them. She knew about Lauren, about the betrayal, about the guilt that still flared up at odd times like an old injury. And he knew about her, how she'd once loved a man who left without goodbye, how she'd built everything from the ground up with nothing but grit and a love for simple beauty. On rainy afternoon, Ethan arrived at the flower stand with Aiden tucked under his coat, giggling at the raindrops. Ava crouched down to greet the boy, her eyes lighting up as he threw his arms around her neck. "He missed you," Ethan said. She looked up. "Did he?" Ethan hesitated, then added, "I did too." They locked eyes. Neither of them moved. Later that evening, back at the apartment, Ethan tucked Aiden into bed, brushing a kiss across his forehead. The boy was growing fast, speaking in full sentences, memorizing bedtime stories, asking questions about stars and dreams. When Ethan returned to the living room, Ava was there. She had stopped by with a small pot of mums, yellow and vibrant, the color of warmth. They sat together on the couch, shoulders just barely touching. "I'm scared sometimes," Ethan admitted, "of being happy again, of trusting it." Ava didn't look away. "So am I. But fear doesn't mean we stop living. It just means we go slower, more gently." There was silence between them again, but not the kind that hurt. It was the kind that felt like rest, the kind that allowed breathing. Ethan turned to her. "Would you stay tonight? Not just for me, but for him too?" Ava nodded. "Only if I can make breakfast." He smiled for the first time that day. A real one. Deal. As the night deepened and the city quieted outside their window, Ethan sat beside the woman who never tried to fix him, only chose to walk beside him. He wasn't healed entirely. Not yet. Maybe never. But something inside him had bloomed again, soft and steady. This wasn't the life he once planned, but it was the life he had grown to treasure. And perhaps, in its simplicity, it was even better. Aiden's laughter echoed through the small backyard as he chased after the wind, a paper kite flapping wildly above him. The autumn sun dipped low, painting everything gold. Ethan stood a few feet away, watching with quiet pride, one hand in his pocket, the other clutching a coffee mug gone cold. Ava stepped out of the house carrying a tray. Hot cocoa for Aiden, chamomile tea for herself, and Ethan's third coffee of the day. Her hair was loose today, framing her face in soft waves, and she wore one of Ethan's old sweaters, sleeves rolled clumsily past her elbows. They had moved in together just over a month ago. No big announcement, no moving truck, just a slow migration of toothbrushes, jackets, and flower pots. It felt right, not like a fresh start, but like a return. Lauren had kept her word. She visited Aiden twice a week now, quiet, measured visits at a neutral park. She no longer asked about Ethan's life, no longer lingered with what-ifs. Instead, she listened to Aiden's endless stories, brought him picture books and snacks, and when she left, she always turned back to say, "Be good, buddy. I love you." It was enough. For now. Ethan had stopped hoping for closure from her. What he had instead was a kind of quiet acceptance of what had been broken, of what had been salvaged. He still remembered the pain, the betrayal, the nights when he held Aiden in one arm and his aching heart in the other. But the grief didn't rule him anymore. It had softened, become a shadow instead of a storm. Aiden ran up to him, face flushed with joy. "Daddy, I made it fly all the way over the fence." Ethan knelt to ruffle his son's hair. "You're getting stronger." Ava sat on the porch steps, tucking her legs beneath her. "He gets it from you." Ethan turned to look at her. The woman who never demanded his healing, only honored it. Who stepped in gently, never replacing, only adding. Who had shown Aiden what love looked like without ever needing a title. He joined her on the steps. They sat in silence as Aiden ran wild under the falling leaves. "Do you ever miss what you had before?" Ava asked suddenly. He didn't answer right away. He thought of the big apartment, the sharp suits, the picture-perfect holiday cards they never got around to mailing. Then he shook his head. "No," he said. "What I had was an illusion. This," he gestured toward the little boy with a kite, the chipped mug in his hand, the woman beside him. "This is real." She smiled softly. "It's not perfect." "No," he said, "it's better." As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Ethan reached for Ava's hand. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. They held on. Inside the house, the lights were warm, the toys scattered, the scent of cinnamon lingering from Ava's baking. A small mess, a real life. A home built not on fantasy, but on truth, pain, and slow-growing trust. Ethan once thought betrayal would define his story, but in the end it didn't. Forgiveness did. Fatherhood did. Love, this quiet, grounded kind, did. And as Aiden shrieked with laughter under the rustling trees, Ethan finally believed, sometimes the most broken roads still lead to the right place.